we've had this rather weird proposal by Putin and Trump to meet in Hungary, and now it's not happening. Obviously, not that we really expected it. What are your reflections and takeaways from this Nothing Burger summit that we did have?
Start changing in Putin-Trump relationship, because Donald Trump, as the result of this nonsense, Donald Trump has finally made the decision, the first decision of a first real step. He placed real sanctions on two Russia's largest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. And he made an announcement that America was considering providing Tomahawks, long-range missiles, to Ukraine, and that's bad news for Russia, bad news for Putin.
This is The Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where in this first half of a two-part conversation, we're going to be looking at the relationship between Trump and Putin. Now, this is obviously something that is omnipresent in the, relations of the two countries at question, but of course, the war in Ukraine. And someone who knows this better than most and talks about it on a daily basis, as he very explicitly reminded me, is Konstantin Samoilov, the host of Inside Russia YouTube channel and, a colleague, friend as well, who we have I think unofficial, but we do this now on a monthly basis. So it's that time again to break down what's happened over the past month from firstly the diplomatic military side, and then the second half, the Russian economy and such. And Konstantin, lovely to see you. My first question is simply, what have your highlights been? What have you taken away from the sort of diplomatic front in the past month?
Well, there have been quite a few developments. One thing for sure is that the diplomatic front these days is not boring. It was fairly quiet about a year ago. Russia was waiting for Donald Trump to become the president, obviously Russian diplomats and Putin. And then since Donald Trump became the president, it's been very, how do I say, eventful, vibrant, and the last few weeks have been very vibrant as well.
That's a very fruity way of describing the dynamics so far, but you could say there's been a lot more direct engagement between these two, obviously. Now, one of the biggest strategic shifts that we've seen, Konstantin, is Trump's flip-flopping. And one of them on a more supportive side towards Ukraine was the decision to share intelligence for strikes inside Russia. A report from the Financial Times said, that this had been going on since the summer. Is this a good thing? Do you think this made a difference to Ukraine strikes across Russia, or it's just Trump being, opportunistic?
Well, first of all, there are two sides of sharing intelligence. It's used very much for defensive purposes to shoot down Russian missiles, and then for offensive purposes as well. If you recall, there was a very good example of that. When Vladimir Zelensky visited the White House and it didn't go well, it was about 6 months ago, then the first move the USA did, it stopped sharing intelligence with Ukraine just for a couple days. And Russia used that window opportunity to execute the largest strike, missile strike on Ukraine to the date. And Ukrainians couldn't intercept most of the missiles, and that strike was absolutely devastating for Ukraine. That's what getting intelligence for Ukraine really means. And then I am not sure how much they use that intelligence to execute offensive strikes on Russian oil refineries and different facilities. Whatever they're doing it very effectively. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's a good distinction there, or making the distinction between offensive or intelligence used for offensive purposes versus defensive purposes. But one of the key points, or people that are more pro-Putin or at least anti-war have made, is that this effectively makes the USA co-belligerent in the eyes of Moscow, in the eyes of the Kremlin. Do you agree with that or not?
Who cares? I don't think so. It certainly does not make the USA the hostile country if we use logic and common sense. But Putin can say anything. He can blame anything. We're at the point where logic and common sense are out of the window. I don't really see how the United States gets into direct confrontation with Russia by providing intelligence information. Okay, but in the Kremlin, they probably think otherwise.
So why then is Putin sending jets, being provocative into NATO airspace? It happened just yesterday again with Lithuania, although, as I made very clear, critical of Lithuania, simply saying, we stand in resolute unity. Why didn't you shoot them down, guys? Like, we need more action than words at this point. So Putin is just doing this because he knows he can get away with it, and keeps probing, or he's trying to subtly escalate.
I think these are two different topics altogether. I think that escalation with the United States and helping Ukraine is one thing, and Russia striking other countries with drones, that happened not too long ago, and violating airspace of NATO countries on numerous times, and just like you said, happened yesterday, the latest incident. That's a completely different thing. I think that Vladimir Putin is using intimidation tactics towards the Europeans. He's trying to wreak havoc in their minds to make them feel feared and insecure. And he's probing. He's constantly probing how far he can push.
So what's the point then of NATO having all these meetings, activating Article 4 for our consultations, discussing things like closing their own airspace or this airspace buffer, the Eastern Sentinel plan? What's the point in all of this if it's not actually going to be implemented into policy or action?
Pyotr, I am the wrong person to ask, really. We need to ask those folks at the leadership of NATO. But they got to do something. I mean, if they don't do anything, they will show their impotence, plain and simple. So they're trying to counteract this hostile actions by doing something, calling Article 4, getting together, discussing. Basically, that's NATO's response to Vladimir Putin and his intimidation tactics and probing tactics. In my opinion, that's very weak response, and Vladimir Putin knows only one response, that is strength. When someone comes and knocks his teeth out, he understands that because that's how he acts. That's what you need to do when you get bullied, and that's exactly, in my opinion, is the right strategy of dealing with Russia. And once Russia understands, when Putin understands that this is it, this is the border, this is a real red line, and I cannot cross it. If I cross it, then the planes will be shot down, and so forth, and he will not push any further. Plain and simple.
But he's not going to respond at all, you're saying. If NATO does actually take which would be significant step of directly downing Russian aircraft, you're saying that the Kremlin will not react because they don't have any other means.
I'm not saying that. Okay, perhaps it's not shooting down, but it's showing that they're ready to shoot down to protect their border. I'm not saying that there will be no response if Russian planes are shot down. And on the other hand, if Russian planes are shot down on the territory of other countries, what kind of response can Russia come up with? I'm saying that it's about being firm, being strong, and making it very clear. You don't have to shoot down planes, you don't have to kill anyone, but you must show the bully that you are not going to let him get away with it. That's all.
Absolutely.
And I mean, like the ways how to do it, I think there are different ways without shooting planes, and it's up to the NATO leadership to come up with these ways. That's what they're getting paid for. That's what they're supposed to do in the first place. And if they can't do that, they got to be fired and prosecuted for complete impotence.
Well, we'll be having a conversation with a couple of staff members from NATO's academic arm, the NATO Defense College, in a couple of weeks. So I'll be sure to keep that point in mind and put it towards them. But, Putin has repeatedly framed any Western involvement as proof of, quote, NATO's war on Russia. Now, how effective is such a narrative like that domestically, but also internationally?
Well, domestically, it's a very effective strategy. Russians do believe that it's not Russia against Ukraine, but that's the world against Russia. This is something that they started brainwashing Russians with, I would say, about 5 months into the war, and they've done it brilliantly. Internationally, depending on the country, but in the West, I mean, everyone understands that's not true. The West and NATO is not waging the war in Russia. But just to give you a personal example, it's becoming more and more difficult for me to explain to Russian people inside Russia that it's not the West against Russia. It's not the West wants to destroy Russia. It's Russia acting as a mad dog. Okay, and that's everyone wants peaceful Russia. That's all, and it's becoming more difficult every single week.
Yeah, there is a growing polarization, even for the ones that were anti the war but Western skeptical. For example, colleagues, friends that I still have in Russia are feeling more and more the persecution that there is. I mean, there are some people in the West who are just flatly anti-Russian every way or Russophobic at this point, and will, even if you say that you've got Russian heritage, like this comes from my own personal experience of meeting people here in London, there's been, pretty unpleasant reactions, which I don't think helps the situation either, though, because it makes them indistinguishable from those who are so anti-Ukraine that they dehumanize the Ukrainians. You know what I mean? So, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, not only I have thoughts, Pyotr, I relate. I am Russian, born and raised Russian. I mean, you hear from my English, it's horrendous because it's my second language. First language is Russian, native language is Russian. I speak with horrendous Russian accent, and I'm picked up as Russian anywhere I go. And yes, I do feel that a lot of people are becoming very hostile. I've seen it in different countries. I've seen it not everyone is hostile, but I've seen it in Kazakhstan. I've seen it in Georgia. I even have seen it in Thailand. Yes, it is the hard fact of life, and it's a very complicated issue, and there is no easy way out. The longer this war goes on, the worse situation becomes.
Indeed.
One of my missions as a public figure is to somehow try to show that not all Russians are warmongers. There's a majority, obviously, right now who are supporting the war in Ukraine, but not all. Okay, there are a lot of Russians left inside Russia and certainly outside Russia with common sense, with logic, with empathy, with compassion, with love in their hearts. And, to treat all the same is absolutely wrong. This is certainly not the way to solve the conflict because the war will be over sooner or later. And I hope sooner, and I pray for that every single day publicly on my live streams. But after the war is over, we are facing a very painful and difficult process of healing for Ukraine, but mostly for Russia and for how Russia is perceived in the world. Okay, and that is going to be a real tragedy of generations of Russian people. My estimate is at least 2 generations will suffer tremendously because what Russia has done in the past 3.5 years.
As we say in international relations, right? It's the single biggest war on European soil, or generally in terms of its magnitude and global repercussions since the Second World War. I think that goes without saying. But, I have a few more questions on the proposed peace talks in Budapest, which are not happening. But before that, I want to ask you 2 more things on this conversation arc, which is what therefore do you agree, though, nothing is going to be possible in terms of a review or a new interpretation of Russia as long as Putin's in power? As long as he's in power, nothing really changes, at least from how people look at Russia inwards.
You mean concerning the war, the way the war is going, right?
And Russia's reputation internationally, at least amongst the West.
Oh, yes. Yes. I think so. But the thing is, every single day that war continues, it becomes more and more difficult for Russia. Back in the past, couple years ago, I heard this opinion was absolutely overwhelmingly majority that people were saying, look, we know that not all Russians are bad people. Most are good people. Okay, we know we don't like Putin. We hate Russian government, but we don't have anything against Russian people. That's been changing. See, every single day that changes towards, okay, you know what? You have allowed your country to be under Putin for so long. You have supported the war for 3.5 years. well, you know what, that must be something wrong with you. And then every single day, situation gets worse and worse and worse for Russians. So, and yes, of course, as long as Putin is in power, nothing will change. It's going to get worse. Everything will get worse. The war will continue because Putin simply doesn't have any options to stop the war right now. Well, he has options, but he's not going to do that because the outcome is not favorable to him. Then Russian economy, my God, where do I even start? It's down the toilet.
Well, we'll come to the Russian economy in the second half. But
Yes. But what I'm trying to say is that he's got to go for changes to start happening. He's going to go. Question is how long he's going to be at the helm of Russia.
Well, if we take his conversations with President Xi Jinping of China, he wants to be around for another 80, 100 years. I don't know about that. To put it on the flip side, Konstantin, one of the questions I asked another friend of the channel, Vlad Vexer, recently was that, you know, for some people who are not pro-Putin, but they are critical of the West's historical engagement of Russia, especially since the end of the Cold War, right? Some people emphasize that it's a mistake to push Russia away from Europe. Russia is inherently more a European country than it is Asia or something else. So it's a mistake to push Russia away from Europe towards China and Asia. When 70% of the people live in the European sphere, most of the ethnicity is white or more Caucasian. What's your sentiments to those sorts of statements?
May I ask you a question? Who
Oh boy.
was pushing Russia away until the start of the war?
Well, their argument would be particularly the Anglo-Saxon sphere, NATO, not specifically just about NATO expansion, but the idea that not enough consideration of Russia's security interests, that, you know, the West is now, Europe particularly, is buying more expensive energy from LNG from America, from Qatar, when Russia was happy to supply it, but there was too much emphasis on Russia having to follow certain Western hegemonic rules and such.
Understood? Then I will rephrase your question. You know, they were pushing Russia away, but they were not embracing Russia enough. I should say that, because I didn't really feel like Russia was being pushed or isolated, pushed away or isolated or hated or, neglected in any way. It's just after the USSR fell apart, obviously, for some time after, it's like the West and Europe, well, more America than Europe, they've lost interest in Russia. So it became from the center of bipolar world, USSR America, one of the two centers, it became to a sort of a peripheral country that really was not that powerful to be the major player on the geopolitical arena. And see, I see that. I don't know if Europeans were historically closer to Russia because of, obviously, the trade. The fossil fuels were being sold to Europe, and that was Russia's probably closest trading partner. So you couldn't get more trade than that. Russia was selling natural gas and oil to Europe, and it's the best location, really, right next door with all the pipelines inherited by the USSR. And then I saw huge development of foreign business in Russia. Large companies first started selling their products and technologies in Russia, and then they started building manufacturing capacities. I helped build a GE plant in Rybinsk. They produced turbines. Then I worked closely with Siemens. And Siemens had some localization in Russia. Major German brands, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, all built factories in Russia. The integration was increasing. You got to start with something. It's like what people don't understand, most people don't understand, is that you cannot build a relationship at an instant. The USSR was the enemy of the free world. There's no question about that. And it fell apart. And a lot of people expected that overnight it would just find itself integrated into the free market economy, global economy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of Russians thought that overnight, since the USSR is gone, overnight they wake up in the West rich. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You have to transform from from socialism or communism to capitalism. And that transformation is very painful. And that's exactly what happened in Russia. And I saw the transfer, I witnessed, I lived it. Then I saw how it was very successful. I saw the first 10 years being very hard, but then Russia started changing, really changing from the inside. And it was on the way becoming the force again, the good force, the force with market economy, run by market economy rules. That's the only way. Unfortunately, along came Putin, and he usurped power, and everything changed. But I saw that if Russia continued to do what it was doing in the late 90s, early 2000s, then it would get closer and closer to Europe. Let me remind you, Russia was very close in negotiations to putting the final signature to a visa-free regime with the European Union. That was the mantra Russian officials had, visa-free with Europe, visa-free. And they were so close. They had gone a very long way getting there. Those who question the West, saying that the West was alienating Russia, please, those should explain me how visa-free travel to European Union would be pushing Russia away. Russia is the country who pushed itself away by its own decisions. Had it been normal, had it been democratic, then it would integrate with the European Union, not necessarily become a part of the European Union, but I mean, you don't have to be friends, to be trade partners, and to be allies with the European Union, okay? I'm very sorry for this long answer.
No, it's nicely said, but, you know, as part of the final question I have for this part then is, looking ahead, we've had this rather weird proposal by Putin and Trump to meet in Hungary, and now it's not happening. Obviously, not that we really expected it. What are your reflections and takeaways from this Nothing Burger summit that we did have?
Where do I even start about that?
Oh, opened another can of worms.
It was yes, you have. Well, not you. Trump has. We're just discussing that. Now, the bottom line, I'll start at the end. The bottom line is the masks are off right now, and I think things will start changing in Putin-Trump relationship, because Donald Trump, as the result of this nonsense, Donald Trump has finally made the decision, the first decision of a first real step. He placed real sanctions on two Russia's largest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. But as for the summit, would-be summit in Budapest, so it all started with Donald Trump saying, all right, I didn't win, well, that's what he thought probably. I didn't win the Nobel Prize, now I gotta come down a little bit and, I can escalate with Russia. And he made an announcement that America was considering providing Tomahawks, long-range missiles to Ukraine, and that's bad news for Russia, bad news for Putin. And you know what happened? Putin got agitated. He started feeling uneasy about that. He started making public statements. When he doesn't care, he usually doesn't speak. He keeps silence. But then all of a sudden he started speaking about Tomahawks, saying, well, they can't do that. If they do that, they escalate a lot. If they do that, that means that America will get into direct confrontation with Russia. And so that we could clearly see that there was fear in that move if America really decided to give Tomahawks. That was very improbable decision. I never believed that Tomahawks would be transferred to Ukraine. But anyway, and then that made Putin and Trump speak. And right after the speech, the conversation, Donald Trump at the press conference said that he was absolutely sure that within 2 weeks, very soon, he would meet with Vladimir Putin face to face in one of the European countries, and it would be great. Okay, and then the war, they would discuss the conditions of the end of the war and all of that. I mean, if you know Putin a little bit, just a little bit, I mean, you could clearly understand there was just, I don't know, if he agreed on anything, that'd be a lie. And he played Donald Trump again. Two ministers, foreign affairs, Russian-American, Rubio and Lavrov, had a conversation. And all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, just a couple days after Donald Trump announced the Budapest meeting, Russian side kind of backed out, said, well, we're going to postpone that. We're not sure. And then in Russia, that's what a lot of people in the West missed. In Russia, they started mocking Donald Trump and making fun of him, making him look like a clown. Russian ambassador Antonov, I think his last name, don't quote me on that, but the Russian ambassador slapped Donald Trump in the face, saying, ha ha ha, you cannot postpone what was not scheduled. So that made Donald Trump look like a fool again for the 6th or 7th time. So basically, he announced to the world that he agreed with Putin on a meeting, and then one of Putin's servants was laughing at Donald Trump, saying that, he's definitely out of his mind, in other words. And then Donald Trump got mad. He understood that he was played, and then the reaction followed. And this is what is really important. The reaction is real sanctions for the first time. Donald Trump, I think he got upset to the point where actually he did something. He placed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, and the very following day, just a few hours after announcement of American sanctions, the Chinese stopped buying Russian oil. And that is huge. That is a real blow to Putin and his economy. It's down the drain already, okay? But this is another blow, a huge one. And Vladimir Putin got upset again. He started speaking yesterday, saying, oh, that's not going to hurt us. Oh, and we know it's just the fact that he started mentioning the sanctions tells those who are inside of Russian affairs, tells a great deal of how important this issue for Putin. Because if it really was not a big deal, he wouldn't even mention that, okay? So now Donald Trump really got him. And there are reports that Trump had 3 different scenarios of sanctions, and he chose the medium one, not the weakest, not the strongest. It means that he has a few trump cards up his sleeves, okay? And that's what I've been saying all along. And remember, we had conversations. All America had to do is continue what Joe Biden, his administration started, pushing more and more sanctions.
Yeah,
just
the
one
economic
step.
warfare is the same.
Yes, Pyotr, just one step 2 days ago. Yesterday, the Chinese gave up Russian oil. One step has made a huge difference. Imagine if there were 10 steps like that.
Yeah. Well, if people want to hear about those 10 steps, then they'll just have to tune in for part 2, won't they? But we'll see you all there. So what happens then if Ukraine, the combination of Ukraine keeping up its various strikes across the country on the oil refineries and the sanctions from America are hitting Russia's industries internally? The combination of these two compounding as we approach winter, over the winter. What kind of impacts can we expect?
This is going to be very difficult for Russians. And we have seen blackouts, we have seen outages of like this interruption in water service, interruption in like sewage service, garbage removal. Now we're seeing fuel shortages.